Hello and welcome. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to another live episode of the Light 'em Up Lounge. Welcome to everybody joining us here via Zoom, to all our dear friends and family watching our Facebook live stream. We look forward to hearing your questions. We look forward to reading your comments. Please make yourselves heard. And it is my sincere pleasure and privilege to welcome today's guest of honor. Ed Sullivan is here with us. Um, you probably know Ed primarily from the Ashholes podcast and in particular the Cigar Authority, um, where Ed usually is a bit more of a behind the scenes kind of guy, whereas David Garofalo, Barry, and Mr. Jonathan are the ones you see on the screen most of the time with the Cigar Authority. Ed Sullivan is the gentleman who runs the whole show behind the keyboard and behind the screen. But Ed, it is such a pleasure and privilege to welcome you. And we want to learn about your story. We want to hear your experience and your passion and enthusiasm about cigars and podcasting. And so, without further ado, welcome to the Light 'em Up Lounge, and thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me here. Yeah, they don't really let me go on camera on Cigar Authority, so this is a rare opportunity. Although I did manage to get on stage for the Ashholes, but yeah, normally on Cigar Authority, I'm the guy off camera making snarky comments. That's my my job on the show.
Even though recently, when you were at the PCA together with Dave, you had a bit
Yeah,
of stage time there, and that was
I,
very well received, I have to
I
say.
did. I said to Dave, I think it'd be funnier if I still wasn't on camera, even though I was sitting right there. But he insisted that I come on camera with him, and yeah, that was a lot of fun. You never know at the trade shows if you're going to be able to get bandwidth enough to be able to actually stream live. So I did end up with a mobile hotspot and kind of blowing up my data plan for that month.
And let's dive right in and let's jump at the very beginning. You have a tremendous wealth of knowledge and experience in the cigar world and also in the podcast world. With everything that you do, you bring together two core pillars that have become important in your life, and that's cigars and the broadcasting world. Which one actually came first for you?
The cigars came long before the broadcasting. So I've been smoking cigars for over 30 years. So there wasn't much internet in those days, you know. And although right around the time I started to get serious about cigars, that's when they started to appear on the internet. And I think it was 1994. There was the Usenet groups, news groups on the internet. Alt.smokers.cigars was the big one at that time, and
Mm-hmm.
that's really where I ran into. This was probably 95. Dave Garofalo, I first became aware of him on Alt.smokers, ASC. We'll shorten it up. That's what everyone called it. And Steve Saka was a big voice on ASC. And it was interesting because social media today, a lot of it is, let me post a picture of my cigar. Not always a lot of discussion. And this was all text in a billboard type of a format. So there was a lot more discussion back and forth about the cigars. I think it felt more like a virtual cigar lounge. And at that time, information just wasn't as available on the internet to go find out about things. So a lot of it was just talking to other cigar smokers. It was always a big event when somebody posted that La Gloria Cubana was available. And this is how far back it'd go. I would have to fax them my order So he'd send a fax down to the factory, and I'd get my bundle of Maduro Churchills that I believe it was right around $80 a bundle at that point in time. So a lot has changed since then. And, then things really started picking up. Cigar Family was big at that. They came out shortly after that. And the other thing was Steve Saka's Cigar Nexus.
Nexus,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And, Cigar Craig was an early blogger. So those were kind of the early days. And at the time I was working in technology. So I sort of followed along for my career in technology, and, I've smoked, let's say, a lot of cigars. Since retiring, I think I usually manage to get in about 8 a day. Now, to be fair, I smoke smaller cigars, so I only count it as a couple a day. My 8 is only a couple. if you compare it to, a couple of 9x90s or something. But then really it wasn't until I retired from technology that I picked up on the podcasting. Dave Garofalo and I have been friends for 27, 28 years. And once I stopped working in tech, I spent some time at home for about 6 months till my wife told me I needed to get out of the house. I think the way she phrased it was, you need to at least be able to cover your cigar budget with some kind of job. So I thought, yeah, Ian's got a point. It's my new math. 1 + 1 = 8. But so I thought, well, the smart thing to do would be go work in a cigar shop. And if I go work in a cigar shop, I can get an employee discount and all my problems are solved. So I did work retail at Two Guys Cigars for about a year. And right at that time, David just finished building his studio upstairs at the cigar shop for the Cigar Authority. And I looked at that and thought, well, that'd be a lot more fun. So I did do some online course and in podcast engineering. And then I started to run the studio for him for about a year and a half. He's got, at the time, about 20 different podcasts that are being recorded in the studio. I don't know what he's got today. COVID cut some of it back, but now it's building again. So,
and not all of them cigar related, right?
No, the only 2 cigar related are Cigar Authority and the Ash Holes. And then he's got podcasts that are, he's got a barbecue show that's done up there that's very popular. He's got financial shows, technology, all kinds of different topics out of there. So that's really when I got deep into the podcasting. And then after that, I actually opened my own podcast production company called Sonic Cupcake, which has no meaning beyond being memorable, I think. People don't forget when you say Sonic Cupcake. And when I wear the T-shirt in public, I always get questioned on what is that? So good way to get some more business, although honestly, I'm not looking for much business. If I have to be indoors, it might impact my cigar smoking for the day. And we can't have that. Well, it looks like you're smoking Garofalo right there.
Keeping it with the family, yes.
So
today I have the pleasure of smoking the La Familia from Dave.
That's the sun grown, right?
Absolutely.
Yep. And Dave will tell you, you take time to appreciate the bands on there, because he'll tell you he spent a fortune on those bands. I think, he had those made in Holland.
It's a beautiful
I think.
one.
Yep, very nice.
Is he
band.
working with John Van Tintelen in the Netherlands?
Yeah, I think Nick Perdomo makes the cigar. So I think Nick arranged the whole thing. And yeah, we ran into them at PCA. We were at a dinner hosted by Nelson Alfonso. And that's what I'm smoking today, one of Nelson's cigars, the Bandolero. And
Fabulous smoke.
for my taste, I like the 46 ring gauge. Well, let me ask you, because I'm old. Does this make me seem even older that I like small ring gauge cigars? They've
I'm
kind of
fully
gone
with
out of
you on that,
fashion. All right.
Ed, I have to confess, I'm fully with you on that, and I very much appreciate my thinner ring gauges and smaller vitolas. And we discussed this to great length here at the show as well. In particular, when we had Jeremiah Marapfel on, for example, who's also an advocate of traditional smaller ring gauges, because the proportions and the balance between the wrapper, the binder and filler tobaccos, and the entire harmony of the raw materials coming together is just different in
Yep.
those. And one could possibly also argue that you're just losing certain qualities of pristine wrapper tobaccos on thicker ring gauges where the whole balance is thrown out.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting then that Noel Rojas has sort of gone to, he's the king of the small ring gauge. And interesting to hear him talk. He believes that it's more difficult to do it well. You know, you've got to make blending choices on that. And I think some of the newer rollers aren't used to rolling in this size. I have have noticed that in some brands, you do find more draw problems once you go to their smaller sizes. So, but
Going back to your illustrious history, both with cigars and the broadcasting world, um, what were some of the learning experiences that you made in retail when you were working at Two Guys, and how has that changed your perspective as a cigar enthusiast
yeah,
on some of the ins and outs of the industry and the aficionados?
it changed a lot for me, right? Because I was a cigar geek and there was a whole bunch of stuff I just didn't smoke.
Hmm.
But when I got to the shop, you really need to be able to work with any of the customers who might come in. So I started and very diligently smoked my way through the whole shop. And I think it sort of brought back an appreciation for some of the milder cigars, something that's well blended and perhaps more subtle. But, you know, I had sort of over the years gone stronger and stronger, and then backed off a little bit. But um, I guess the other thing that changed too is cigars got stronger and stronger. So
Hmm.
even if you reach for Nicaraguan filled Connecticut, a lot of those are approaching medium strength. Whereas in the old days, that's pretty much as far as you went by today's scale. Nothing really went above medium. But I think the other thing you learn is that you start to learn, okay, this isn't a cigar for me, but still you learn to judge it for how good of a cigar it is. And some of that, as you know, you have to apply that for the cigar journal tasting. And, you know, often I'll get something and think, well, I don't know if I like this cigar, but you can't just go with your pure personal opinion on it, you know, and as you go through and start to experience the different flavor profiles, then you get an idea, okay, this one's not for me, but it's a good cigar. And I could see this type of person with the retail experience. Now, not just avatars, I have real people in my head. This is a cigar that Charlie would enjoy, or this guy would like it. The only thing I wasn't able to overcome were flavored cigars. Just not for me. I can't even pretend to find any good in them. However, there are a lot of people that smoke them. You know, if you look at something like acid, we sell at the shop a ton of those. But, and, you know, overall, I think I also learned I'm not sure I have the patience for some people, which was why I headed upstairs to the studio. It was a lot easier than dealing with some of the customers. Although, as Dave Garofalo always said, cigar retail is different because anybody coming in the store is going to buy something, right? It's not like your standard retail, and they're going to buy something that they like. So most of them are predisposed to be in a better opinion or a better state of mind than say when they go to the grocery store. So
it's an excellent point. Ed, we had a great question from Steve Newman over on Facebook, and he's curious as to what type of questions would you ask either a new enthusiast when you're trying to make a recommendation to them, or probably, you know, just random people walking into two guys. How do you start that initial conversation? How do you try to get to know them and understand in that short time span that you
yeah,
have, what is she or he looking for, and what could be the perfect cigar for what they're looking for?
and that's an interesting one, right? Because some people don't want your help. So I think initially you have to greet anybody enthusiastically that comes into the shop and ask them if you can be of assistance to them. Some will say no and then wander around the shop forever and eventually come back. But I think usually I like to know, well, have they smoked? Are they current cigar smokers? What cigars do they like smoking? Now, if they're not cigar smokers, then I tend to, you know, you have your go-to things for them to try. And you definitely want to keep it on the milder side of the spectrum, but still something that's flavorful. So, you know, at Dave's store, that's typically the La Giana line, where I don't think we're supposed to say who makes them anymore. They're made by a well-known manufacturer in the Dominican Republic. And it's oh, sorry, no, those are actually made in Honduras. Still a well-known manufacturer who manufactures in both countries. But those tend to be mild but flavorful cigars. And, you know, I think for other people, often they'll come in asking for something from one of the big companies, you know, like a Romeo and Juliet or something like that. And if they're interested in trying something else, I think I could find them something that they might enjoy more at the same price point from another company.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is about asking a few questions. And for the one that Dave always likes is when folks haven't smoked before, it's worth knowing if they're cigarette smokers, because then you can sort of up the ante a little bit, probably take them to something medium strength, and you want something that's going to deliver a lot of flavor so that they'll still be able to taste it beyond all the cigarettes they're smoking during the day. But and for gifts, it's another, we often have people who don't intend to smoke the cigars themselves, and that can be challenging unless it's one of our customers, because we do have a database of all the purchases that they've ever made. So especially if it's a gift, you can sort of look and see, okay, normally they smoke these at, let's say, a $10 price point. Well, it's a gift. How much do you want to spend? That's always a question you need to ask the consumer. And if it's a gift and they want to spend a little bit more, if you know what their typical cigar is, it's a lot easier to find something that might be, you know, a very good $20 cigar that would be a special occasion cigar for them. So
You also made an excellent point earlier when you spoke about the tasting panel from Cigar Journal, which we're both proud members of, if I may say. Um, it it takes a bit of taking a step back and same as with the retail, realizing it's not about yourself, it's not about
right.
your own preference, and in particular in retail, and me having worked as a bartender, at the beginning you're probably more enthusiastic and you try to recommend something to people that you personally like, and but purely because you're into old fashions and Manhattans and dark brown
Right.
spirits and stirred drinks. Doesn't help in recommending them, and then people won't be happy, most certainly. And I think it's a humble approach, and it makes you realize that take a step take a step back, focus on the other person, and try to get a sense of what they truly want, or in the case of doing a blind review, is taking a step back and purely evaluating the cigar for what it is delivering and how it presents itself, much rather than do you personally like that particular taste profile or the aromaticity of the cigar and the taste in general.
Right. As the person helping them, your job is really to make sure they're delighted with what they purchased. Not that they purchased what you wanted them to, but that they're going to enjoy the product they purchased. You know, the other one always on the way out, especially with people who are new smokers, you always want to make sure they have the tools they need. It's not, they're not going to be delighted if they have a cigar and then realize this isn't a gas station cigar with a hole already in it. So it's important always to make sure they have the means to cut and light a cigar. So yeah, but I only lasted about a year there, I think, and then my patience ran out.
And you found yourself upstairs taking care of the podcasting side of things. Um,
So that was
Interesting.
about 5 years ago that I started on the Cigar Authority. So
Mhm.
I'm still the new guy. Maybe I always will be.
Now, as sort of a follow up to the question that I posed earlier, is how did that side of experiencing cigars and experiencing the whole industry and that ecosystem around it, how did that ultimately change your perspective as a cigar enthusiast, which we all are first and foremost?
Yeah, I mean, even though at that point I had been smoking for the better part of over 25 years, just being a part of the show, I've learned a ton in 5 years, especially having some of the manufacturers come on the show, and often they'll hang around and just chat afterwards. So you start to get a much better perspective of the challenges that they're facing. And when you really understand what it takes to land this premium product in your hand, you don't tend to complain about price as much anymore because it's
Very
really,
true.
there's a lot that goes on. And, you know, as a consumer, you don't often think, oh, all of a sudden box prices have gone up significantly. And then as you follow that through the whole chain, that lands it in the retailer's hands, you know, especially, okay, here's the wholesale price. And now you got to put a margin on that. So every small increase in cost at the source has a multiplier that it gets applied to it before it reaches the consumer's hands. And I think that's a big thing. But what I've really found is the successful ones still, no matter how long they've been doing it, still have a great passion for it. They really like to talk about the whole process, and they just show so much pride in the manufacturing and craftsmanship of the product they're putting out. So, yeah, I mean, for Cigar Authority, we've always looked at that as edutainment is the word. You know, it really needs to be entertaining. In the podcast world, people often say, listeners come for the content, but they stay for the host. So over
Excellent point.
time, we've developed very, very loyal listeners. And, I think we've, I'd say even in recent times, started to get much more involved with the live audience and bringing some of their comments into the show. But Dave is a stickler for preparation. So we've got our show notes lined out with timestamps on them. And, it, it's interesting because it sometimes I think people, it seems like a random mess as we go through the show, but it's pretty well planned, not down to, scripted, but we've got an outline of here are the things we have to cover in the first segment, second, third, and so on. So,
And it's a very delicate dance to be well prepared on the one hand, but at the same time to keep that spontaneity and keep that natural vibe where it just feels like
yeah.
friends having a conversation around the table
And
and with the
I,
cigar in hand.
I think that's a big part of what works in spite of the grief that some people give each other. We're all friends outside of the show, and we get along. And the other thing is, for a podcast, typically I would tell people, absolutely do not have four people on microphone. It'll be a mess. But I think we've worked together enough that we're very conscious of not stepping on each other as we're talking. So it flows reasonably well. And what we've found is sort of interesting. You go back and you look and say, all right, how do the shows do with guests on them versus not? 95% of the time, we do better with no guest on the show, which I
Interesting.
found interesting. Yeah. Some people will change that. Saka has such a big following that if you have Steve on the show, it's going to be a big show for us.
And one thing that I'm very curious about is, and funnily enough, it sort of goes to the cigar manufacturing side as well. Do you take that feedback into consideration and do you try to optimize your output as per the feedback that you get from the listeners? Or is it more like, here's what we want to present, here are the topics that we want to focus on? And the reason I also spoke about the analogy with cigar making, I was just thinking about that earlier.
Yeah.
As a manufacturer, what do you want to bring to the table? Would you rather produce cigars that the market wants to see and smoke and enjoy, or is it purely your own expression of the things that you love?
Yeah, and I think they are very similar. It's interesting that you pointed that out. What you really need is a vision for your own show, what you want it to be, and then listen to every piece of feedback. But we probably take 20% of it, maybe less. And I think I work with other podcasters, and sometimes they fall into the trap of one person told them something, so they change their show.
Mm.
And well, the silent majority may not like that change that you made. So you really have to be careful. And sometimes we'll try things and they're just not working. So don't do that anymore. And over time, you want your show to evolve somewhat. And, I've found that, we do take a lot of feedback from listeners on show ideas, but not necessarily specific format instructions. Some people say, well, I don't know, Dave looks like he's falling off the stage. That's where Dave sits. You're not going to change that. It's sort of interesting. He does sit to the edge of the stage, but unseen by the viewers is that there's a big support structure there. So he can't sit really where I would like to have him sit for the camera shot, but it's all a fairly casual show anyway. I think Dave says when he first started, he wanted it to be super professional, like a news show. I don't know. I think people sometimes they like mistakes that are made. And believe me, the rest of the panel is quick to point out those mistakes. And we just have fun with it. And, if you look at the Ashholes, it's a very different show from Cigar Authority, although now both Dave and I are on the show. But that one's a much shorter format and tends to be more like a conversation in a cigar lounge. And so we'll cover some nonsense topics and then get back to the cigar at some point. So we'll usually check in, 3 or 4 times over 40 minutes to see how we all feel about the cigar we're smoking on the show. But I think
please continue.
Yeah, the thing is, if you look, Cigar Authority's coming up on 13 years, which is pretty early in the history of podcasting that Dave got that show going. But now, I don't know, there's at least dozens of cigar podcasts out there. I'd guess in the 3 dozen or more that people may or may not have heard of. And folks often say, well, that's a lot of competition. And it's not competition at all. People sort of look at podcasting sometimes from a weird angle and act like it's the old network TV. Somebody's going to watch this or this. I think a lot of consumers listen to half a dozen podcasts about cigars. And really, they're all a little bit different depending on what the host brings to it, what their perspective is. And, in this podcast world, they say your best bet is to really niche down on a topic. So I think for cigars, it can be interesting to see a different perspective. You had Stogie Lads on. That's a very different show from Cigar Authority, and an excellent show. I think that one, gives a perspective from somebody younger than we are, a different country. So there's plenty of room for new shows. I'd love to see more women involved. There are fewer women cigar smokers, but that would be a great niche. And I think that they'd get a lot of attention on that. We're seeing younger people all the time, which I like. Matt Tobacco, he and Nicole have certainly started to build something. And I think it was just their 3rd anniversary. So for us, it's not about competing at all. We had Coop on a couple weeks ago. He happened to be in the area, so we got him on the show. Always great to talk to him.
And it was a wonderful show. I very much enjoyed it.
We told him beforehand, Coop, this isn't a 3-hour show. You're going to have to move it along. We only have 2 hours, and even 2 hours is a long time. I mean, from doing this show, the time, it depends. For you do a lot of guests, so it probably depends on the guest. Sometimes it probably feels like a 6-hour show. You never know. I've done.
Well, funnily enough, Saka was the absolute record that we ever broke. It went on for, I believe, 3.5 hours with him.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, knowing Steve. He has a lot to say, but always an interesting guest. And yeah, he's not afraid to be controversial either.
You made an excellent point about the diversity, about niching down and finding your own voice. Because ultimately, I feel like during most of the interviews, especially with guests that are well known and you find them on all various podcasts, if you always go through the same routine of what was the first cigar you smoked, how did you end up in the industry, and how did it evolve from there, well, then you probably get a lot of similar shows
Yeah.
that have a clearly laid out structure, and you'll always get to the same answers. But offering different perspectives, and this is also what we try here at the Light 'em Up Lounge, is to host a different set of guests every now and
Yeah.
then, like yourself, or when we spoke to the guys from Futamura Group, the biggest supplier of cellulose film to the cigar industry, where 80% of all the cellophane that you see in the industry comes from them. That's a different story to tell, and it pulls away the curtains of the industry a little more.
And I agree with you. Sometimes, if a particular manufacturer is making the rounds, the second time you watch on a different show, it seems like you're watching a rerun. And I think everybody needs to, if you're going to have guests, you do a little bit of homework, understand who the guest is, and then start to think of the questions that haven't been asked before.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I know. I don't know if you saw last weekend's show. Dave did an interview with Lisette, which I thought was an excellent interview. And well, I don't think she gets on many shows.
Yeah,
I haven't seen her making the rounds, but I think Dave likes to. They did a lot of talking about the family more than the specific cigars and that sort of thing. And I think it's a good opportunity too for the manufacturers to let people get to know them aside from just their product, because I think a lot of cigar smokers are very loyal, not just to the product, but to the person manufacturing the product.
Speaking of pulling away the curtains a little more, Ed, one of our dear guests and fellows and friends here at Light 'em Up is Macy Henson, a lawyer and avid cigar lover. He sent a couple of questions via email because he's stuck in some litigation, I believe. He said he very much
I'm not in
appreciates.
trouble. Lawyers scare me.
Not at all. But he said he very much appreciates any form of cigar media that helps pull back the curtain a little more. And he greatly values many of the segments that you have had on the Cigar Authority, like even the Rep X or the Dirty Secrets show you had on recently. So he was curious, why aren't there more programs like this, and why are some of the members of the cigar industry, he calls it quote unquote paranoid. I don't necessarily agree with the paranoid aspect, but why aren't they disclosing more detailed information with cigar consumers? Um, do you think that is primarily because most people just don't care? Or do you think, I recently heard Michael Herklotz on another show where he said, enjoy the art, listen to the song that I'm playing or that I'm composing, savor the cigar that I'm blending, but you don't have to, take every little element apart and look at it from 20 different angles.
Yeah, I think as far as, pulling back the curtain, depending on whose show it is, they may not have that information themselves. Dave's in a pretty unique position where any given week he'll talk to, a dozen people that are deeply in the business. And so he'll see things that others don't even see. But I think a lot of it is, and sometimes when you pull back the curtain, you see ugly things. I don't feel personally that I want to bring those ugly things to light. It's, for me, whatever content we're doing should be for the benefit of the cigar industry.
Absolutely.
Now, I think some of the rep X stuff. I don't know. I think anybody in the industry knows some of what goes on with cigar reps, but I think that one may have been interesting to a segment of our audience. So depending on who your audience is, they sort of crave a certain view on the content. Yeah, some some people, Michael Herklotz, it's great. Yeah, you can just appreciate this for what it is. But a lot of cigar smokers want to know more than that. Like, why is it what it is? So, I think it varies by the person, how far they want to get with the why question, and some will
I,
go
and
very
and
deep. They have to understand how tobacco gets fermented down to the nth degree. I don't need to even go that deep myself, so part of it is what's your interest in it. And you can find maybe, well, you can't find a show for everything yet, which is why I encourage people to bring their perspective, and somebody else may bring more of a behind the curtain perspective, and that might be the point of their show.
there's two things that come to mind for me. One is journalism in general has to have a bit of a neutral perspective and help disclosing certain things, even if they're probably not as pretty as we would like them to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a certain responsibility on the media side to speak the truth and try to pull away the curtains ever so slightly. Where I think things are slightly different in the cigar industry is most of the media people in cigars are, first of all, not always purely journalists by profession, but rather cigar
Yeah.
enthusiasts who want to share their perspective on the industry. And then also another critical aspect where information could come in handy is um, the cigar industry is probably not as transparent, or information is not as readily available
Right.
concerning this wonderful thing compared to certain other products out there and other industries.
I think you're absolutely right about that. It's always, as I said at the very beginning, you could get very little information. There's more information all the time, but still, a Google search, and you've probably done it on a particular product or something, but sometimes you come up empty. And you certainly wouldn't come up empty on other products. So I think there is less information than in some other industries. So that to me is something that we can help with and bring some of the information to the listeners and consumers of our show. But for me, I
And in
think,
that regards, I think the cigar media professionals are, as we discussed before, they're not purely journalists from an independent perspective, but also servants to the industry to help bring forth information that otherwise would be very tough to get.
yeah. And, people, the one that always comes up is, where are all the bad cigar reviews? Right. And I'm sure, I'm sure they're out there, but for us at the Cigar Authority, we do smoke everything. If something is a bad product, well, we don't see it as often because guess what? Dave Garofalo doesn't buy that product.
Mm.
So even when we get to the Cigar Authority Cigar of the Year, folks say, yeah, but you only put stuff you sell in that. And he said, well, exactly. That's the stuff that I thought was the best product. That's what I brought in. So that's what we're going to include for our Cigar of the Year. But for me, listen, these are people's livelihoods. I don't feel comfortable trashing somebody else's work. I just,
Excellent point.
it's not where I want to be. So for me, often, and listen, you can hear it when people talk about cigars, not in my wheelhouse. Well, what does that mean? I don't know. Maybe they don't like it. Is it bad? Well, it used to be much easier to say what a bad cigar is, right? Because it just didn't draw or it had burn problems. The tobacco was under fermented. All kinds of things can make it quite objectively not a good cigar. But there's much less of that these days. Although I will say, in the latest cigar boom towards the end of this, I don't know if you noticed, even from the blind taste testing, for the first time, I was starting to see things that didn't burn as well as they should. I had a couple, and this is over multiple, but I had a couple that didn't draw, could not review it. So I think if there is a little bit of a pullback from the demand, that's not necessarily a horrible thing, because once you get to the boom times, you can see the deterioration happen over time for some manufacturers as they're trying to rush product to meet consumer demand. So
I would like to bring in Brian, who's joining us from sunny California yet again. Brian, welcome.
Hello,
Where's
good morning.
where's the lawnmower today?
I'm early. I raised my hand early. I'm going to be ahead of the gardeners. Also, Macy's not even in the lounge, and he still gets his question in before me. I'm a big fan of this. I'm really enjoying myself. I'm on Cigar Authority right now. Actually, I go to the site all the time to look at the reviews. I'm a big fan. I'm enjoying the conversation about transparency. I think there's this beautiful thing in the cigar world that I've noticed throughout all these calls. It's like this sense of nobility that you don't find in other industries, where a social media person or a journalist or a cigar manufacturer or a shop owner won't name names. They'll say, there are some companies out there. I'm not going to name names. You hear Jose Blanco say it all the time, and you're doing it today. And I think it's really cool because, you know, when we're having the conversation about the controversy about certain brands marketing cigars to look like candy bars, or we were just having a discussion the other day about a certain manufacturer and why is there so much smoke and why is it blue? But no one says,
I could guess who you were talking about, but I'm not going to say it. How's that?
why is it blue smoke? What are they doing in there? But no one's naming names, and I think that's really nice to see in a world where no barking. Where that's my dog.
He's naming names.
He is. He knows all the names. Yeah, exactly. But in dog language, that's okay. Social media is so mean, and people are mean, and you know, you look at reality TV, and it's nothing but terrible things that people are saying about each other. So I think that's a beautiful thing about this world. I was going to jump over to another topic where we're talking about kind of the different formats of different online shows. I love this. I mean, maybe I'm just like a Reinhardt fan from the start, but I'll be honest. I haven't seen the Cigar Lads or Ashhole or Ray show. I don't nothing against them. I'm sure they're wonderful. For me, there's something really special about the interaction, the interactive element, and I may be unique because I also am not just huge into social media in general. I kind of, you know, you can watch someone stream their band on YouTube and leave comments. I'm like, I'm like an AOL chat room. Like I was bored of that so many years ago. And I just wonder, do you think I'm really unique in that? Or do you think there's some amazing value, like the way I feel, to something like this that's a lounge and it's interactive as opposed to a podcast or something streamed?
Yeah, I think there are shows for everyone. You're not unique. I think there are people that like that. What we find on Cigar Authority, and we don't pull people into the show, but we'll check the chat room and let people participate in the show, depending on how mean they are, because they all have mean things to say about Mr. Jonathan. But there are other formats that work well for other people. For example, Cigar Authority, we do roughly 10 times the number on the audio podcast. Well, why is that? Well, people listen in their cars. You know, it'd be hard if you were driving around. I suppose you could do it, but it'd be a little dangerous to be participating in the show while driving. So I think, across the board, people consume media in different ways. And that's why you need the best variety of media. So everybody can find something that they like and enjoy participating in. So I don't know, for me, again, I just say the more the merrier. We can't have too much cigar content out there. And everybody brings a unique perspective. And so often, as I say, people identify with the host of a show and they like what that person is doing. They like him as an individual. In fact, the other thing they always talk about in podcasting is, people know, like, and trust the host of the show. Once they know, like, and trust the host of the show, then you're going to start to build real loyalty amongst the listening group. So, no, you're not unique. Did you want to be?
No, I was just curious. I just thought maybe I'm the weird one, but that's a great answer though. That's really well put. Do you feel like it reminds me of the other famous Ed Sullivan. Do you feel like with this same name, you channel some of his brilliance in terms of stage presence and being that likable host that people relate to and trust?
I like being just sort of the voice of God off camera. Especially on Cigar Authority, I just throw my 2 cents in every now and then, usually to stir the pot a little bit. And then I mute my mic and sit back and watch the fireworks. That's the fun of it for me. But and then, on the Ashholes, as I say, that's more like 3 knuckleheads in a lounge talking about stuff. So we'll cover topics that are not necessarily even cigar related, or for that show we tend to have a theme for the show. And then the segments we do will follow the theme for the show. So we do a top 5 list and all that sort of stuff. So a lot of shows and podcasts follow a pretty predictable format. People like the familiarity of it. Okay, now we're going to do this, and now we do this, and then we go to this segment. And so they know what they're getting every time they go in. If they like it, they'll stay. If they don't like it, they'll go find another show. And, unlike some folks, as long as they find something they like, I'm happy for them. It might be us or it might be somebody else. But it's all good for the industry.
Great answers. Thank you. Cheers. What do you like? What are you smoking today?
I am smoking a Bandolero. Very good cigar made by Nelson Alfonso. He's the guy who does Atabey and Byron. But for me, I like to refer to the Bandolero as the poor man's Byron. It's got a lot of the flavor profiles, maybe not quite as refined, certainly not as aged as the Byron is, but very nice cigar. And then I got a backup too. Which is the Aladino Corojo Reserve, which is really one of my favorite cigars. What I often say, I don't know, people probably think I'm crazy, but this cigar tastes more like old-time Cubans than the current Cubans do. And, the reason being that this is from the original Corojo seed, and they stopped planting that in Cuba late 90s. And that's about the time I stopped smoking Cuban cigars. But I'm not here to bash on Cuban cigars because I think they have a unique flavor profile that I enjoy occasionally. But given where the pricing's going, they price themselves out of my budget.
I love the Aladino Classic.
Very good cigar.
Thanks again.
Yep.
Brian, many thanks for the excellent question. And Ed, I would love to go back to a point that you mentioned earlier when you were depicting the history of cigar media, but
Yeah.
also boards and forums. And you just a few moments ago mentioned the word content. And this is something that we discuss on the show every now and then, because I I keep wondering, why isn't there more editorial content in the cigar world?
Hmm.
Why are so many of the well-known and much respected platforms, and kudos to them, as you said, we need all of them, and they're super important and make a valuable contribution to the ecosystem. But why aren't there more editorial pieces of content that dive deep or provide different perspectives and really focus on the content side of things, much rather than just copying another press release, and you will find the same press statement on 20 different
Yeah.
blogs and websites?
I I think a big part of it is mostly this is people's hobbies. It's not necessarily their jobs. So some of it is what's the time available? I think editorial stuff always gets somebody mad at you. And I think a lot of the cigar people that are doing the content don't really want anyone mad at them. The exception might be Charlie Minato. Somebody's always mad at Charlie. But I mean, he brings, I think, by far the best content around the legal side of things. You know, with the
100%.
FDA, it's just amazing what he does with that, and that is a ton of work. But that's not editorial necessarily; it's news reporting. But he goes very deep on it and does give some opinion of where he thinks it'll go, because that's what people want to know. They don't want, okay, here's just a list of facts, figure it out for yourself. So I think at some level, almost all the cigar media, and you've heard Dave say there's no such thing as cigar media, but I think he's talking more about uh, cigar news from a journalistic standpoint, because everybody is bringing a little bit of editorial in the way things are reported in the cigar industry, which I think is fine. It's reflective of the personalities. Nobody is really doing pure news, I don't think. You know, Half Wheel may be the closest, but they're they're still mixing in reviews, which are no doubt opinion pieces. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think people are inclined to get embroiled in controversy. It'd be my take on it.
That's an excellent point. And
You know,
what
the closest we got recently, of course, is all these packaging issues, right? You saw what that turned into in various forums, and I think, regardless of people's intentions, what it turned into was just sort of a mess. You know, I think people are trying to do the right thing, but the right thing is for us as a cigar community to be united. And listen, people who do something illegal, that's one thing. The packaging of these products, there's nothing illegal about it. There's opinions that this may be bad for us, although some of the opinions were a little odd. This will get the FDA to regulate it. Well, they already do, you know. So I think for me, I don't think it's a good choice to do this, but clearly no one is intending to market the product to children. These are premium cigars. They're sold in established shops that are checking IDs of all the people walking into the shops. So if you really want to worry about that, it's more gas station cigars that you need to be worried about, not the premium cigar business. And again, it's not not my role to go trash somebody who's making a product, supporting themselves and or their family. Not what I would do, but that's okay. I'm not in that business. And most of the people, not all, but most who are commenting are not in the business themselves. They're on the periphery of it.
What also sparked my interest is when you spoke about that evolution, that in previous days there was probably more of that, let's have an open conversation, let's share some valuable content with Cigar Nexus and some of the old platforms. And it's somewhat turned into the current state of social media, where it's all about, here's me and my cigar, and you can all participate by watching those pictures or little snippets and reels on Instagram. Um, why do you think that has changed? Is it just the pure nature of how social media works today, and people's lust and enthusiasm for putting themselves in the spotlight?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly isn't specific to the cigar industry, right? You go to Twitter, you go to YouTube, and it's just a mess. People are not at all respectful. And I think as a cigar community, we should strive to be different from other people and be respectful. Like you say, everybody is allowed to disagree, but have a dialogue about it, have conversations about it. Don't just go right into the gutter for a fight about it. And, I think it's healthy to have those discussions, but in a constructive way. And I certainly felt like, especially with the packaging thing, people weren't being respectful with one another.
Where do you think the whole social media game is headed, in particular when it comes to cigars? Obviously, one aspect of that is regulatory issues yet again,
Mm-hmm.
because you experienced it yourself, and you were adamant about spreading your wings further and exploring different platforms, just in case YouTube wouldn't allow the Cigar
Yeah.
Authority to be on there anymore. Do you think that's going to favor independently hosted platforms, similar to what Dojoverse would be, or I think Cigar Public is venturing into that as well? And do you also think that there could be an opportunity for more of that in-depth content, or is it going to be just another feed and another wall of people posting pictures of themselves with a cigar?
Yeah, my own view is it's not heading anywhere good. Um,
Mhm.
just because in the early days, uh, let's go all the way back to ASC. That was people talking about everything, right? And if you get a manufacturer now who's hosting content, like Cigar Family back in the day, well, now that's really about their product. It's not about all products. So once you start to go to destinations that contain only one type of content, I don't think that's a positive trend,
Yeah.
right? So right now, if you go to YouTube and search cigars, you can find all kinds of stuff, right? If you go to a specific person's hosted site, you're going to find what they want you to find. Not that that's necessarily bad, it's just not inclusive or as broad as the opportunity now. So I think I've talked to you before about the biggest issue is going to be if we get booted from these platforms, the discoverability of the content will be a big problem. Where do you go to find this stuff? Now, you probably still have Google, but we don't know whether they'll continue to index this stuff. If they don't index it, you don't find it. And then how do you get the word out that, oh, I have great cigar content at this location? So for me, a lot of that is why podcasting is still important. Podcasting is all done from RSS feeds. So far, the biggest podcast hosting companies like Libsyn, Podbean, Blueberry, they're not trying to moderate content. They'll draw the line at things like hate speech, but as long as what you're talking about is legal, they're not trying to moderate that content at all. So for the foreseeable future, podcasts are the safe haven. Now, interestingly, and many people don't even know, you can have a video podcast. The challenge with that is that it costs much more to host the video content, big files, all of this. And a lot of the podcast apps don't even play the video content. So it may head in that direction at some point as it becomes more restrictive what you can put on some of these other places. And, even YouTube, if you really look at their terms of service, if you're talking about any product that has nicotine in it, you are supposed to mark that content as 18 plus. We've done that on Cigar Authority. From the time we did that, our numbers dropped 25% because it's not discoverable in the same way that it was before. Many people will watch YouTube, but not logged in. If you're not logged in, you can't see the content that's marked 18 plus. And, then you've got the issue of you're not allowed to promote those products. Well, what's promotion? Is us talking positively about the product, promoting it? Certainly, if you're telling people, go buy it over here, that's a problem. So the way their policies are written now, they could shut down the content pretty much overnight if that was the choice they made. Facebook, I don't know if you've noticed over time, numbers have eroded there. I think they're not surfacing the content in the same way that they used to. And
I'm not entirely sure whether that's a general issue with Facebook content, or purely a tobacco issue. It's probably a combination of both, I would say.
I would guess so. But the future's not looking too bright right now. So I'm hoping I'm wrong about some of this, but as we say on Cigar Authority, if we disappear from video, tune into the podcast, we'll let you know where we ended up. Right now, Cigar Authority goes out on YouTube, Facebook, then gets posted on Odyssey and Rumble. Now, it's less likely that Odyssey or Rumble will clamp down on content, although you never know in the future, depending on whether somebody buys it or what happens with it. But they're just not the same as putting it on YouTube. It doesn't have the same popularity. So
I think Jose wanted to chime in there
Right.
and share his perspective. Welcome,
Mr. Ed
Professor.
Sullivan, how are you?
I am well. How are you, sir?
Good, good. Listen, a couple of things. I'm sorry I had 2 conference calls and I'm out here in the balcony smoking a cigar, which I don't smoke at night, but I had an urge to smoke. Let me ask you this. Dave and I go way back. I've been on the show a couple of times. I know Barry well, Mr. J. And of course, I hear you not every Saturday, but when I have time and somebody's interesting, I go in. I want to hear your opinion. And we don't mention names on our show that we do. But one thing that really, I'm not going to say bothers me, but I look for it about people who are trying, that have these podcasts on YouTube. You see a lot. And unfortunately, the information that they are giving out is totally wrong. When they talk about different types of tobacco, they talk about fermentation, they talk about curing, they talk about seeds, they talk about a whole bunch of things. So my question to you is, even though they have following, and I monitor a lot of them and I see that the views are going down, Do you think that consumers today are more conscientious of what's really happening in the industry, and who are the people that really know about the blends and know about tobacco and that really know content, that these people just little by little start to fade away? But at the same time, I get every day Twitter at least 10, Instagram 15 or 20, and Facebook at least 15 messages a day. People asking me questions because they heard so and so talk about this. And I address them because I try to address everybody who asks me a question. That's I've done it for years and years. So what's your opinion about these people that want to be in the business, but they don't do their research, and they've never been in a factory, they've never been in a barn, they don't know anything about curing or fermentation, that are giving out all these opinions out there?
Yeah, so that's interesting, right? Because YouTube is a wealth of misinformation, if we take YouTube as an example. And I find that, especially in podcasting, we'll take it away from cigars, just people spewing things they don't know what they're talking about. A lot of those people are creating content not for the passion of what they're talking about. They're creating it because they think they can make some money from it. And those people tend to not be the best source of information. And as you alluded to, they fade away over time. But anybody who's, say, new and doesn't know any different, they assume this person has expertise that they don't have. And then they're likely to repeat that misinformation to other people. I think, fortunately for us, fortunately or unfortunately, the vast majority of people who smoke cigars don't listen to shows like this. They smoke what they like and they go about their lives. But I think, for me, the best that we can do is try to educate the people who don't have the right information, and this is not to attack them. For example, in the podcast world, often there are people that are putting out information and they are not giving the correct information, right? They often say, give us a 5-star review, it helps people find us. Well, no, it doesn't. It's a mechanism for social proof that people like your content. So often I'll contact those people offline, at their email, and just try to provide them with the right information. And it'd be an interesting thing, Jose, for you to try that with someone and see, are they receptive to that? And will they actually change what they're doing? And try to get the right information to bring to people. Because I agree with you. I listen to a lot of cigar content, and frankly, without naming names, a lot of it's junk as far as the information goes. They'll give out very bad information. And I don't think it's not good for us, but I don't think it's ultimately hugely harmful, because, as you said, if you follow them for a while, whatever following they had tends to disappear. And as people become more educated, I think they start to realize, hey, this thing I've been listening to, they're not telling me the right information. So, yeah, I don't know how much we can do about it except try to provide the people making this content with the correct information. And then what they do with it is sort of up to them.
I have a story to tell about this. I'm not going to name it because he blogs a bit. So I'm looking at this tweet that comes up in my feed. And the guy says, well, I just smoked this amazing cigar from a Ligero seed. And I go like, what the fuck? And all of a sudden I direct message him and I said, so-and-so, first of all, Ligero is a priming. Then he says, well, so-and-so told me this. I said, look, so-and-so is an idiot. And if you follow him, and I'll reach out to him, because I mean, how could somebody who's giving out information doesn't know the primings of corojo, I mean of a corona, of ligero, of a viso, a seco, and a volado. So after that, he got back to me, says, oh, you know what? I said, first thing is delete that tweet. So people, I guess they're laughing who's ever following you. And that's why I say there's so many people. And to be honest, I'm going to say it probably, I've already don't check out a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
Because unless I see somebody that's really out there that has good content, I'll just check it out, because I'm too old to hear all this BS. And to be honest, it does annoy me, because the only thing I've done for years and years and years is to try to educate. So I will continue to do it, and I get back to everybody, but it's that's my 2 cents. It's great to see you, Ed.
It's good to see you. I think it's human nature too. People want everybody to view them as an expert. And if you don't know the answer, the right answer is, I don't know. I'll find out for you. Right? Because no matter how long any of us have been enjoying cigars, there's always somebody who knows something we don't. So I think it's always worthwhile to admit what you know and what you don't know. And then if somebody's got a good question, then I think, okay, well, I should go learn about that then. And I think that's the approach that yields the best content. People who have genuine passion and curiosity. And especially if you go on your own journey to learn some information and then share that with your audience, I think that can be very powerful.
Thanks,
Amen
Ed.
to that. Many thanks, Jose. Over to David.
Hi. How y'all doing?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
Good, Ed. So I had a quick question. I know everyone's been kind of worried about the future of the cigar industry with everything going on, rules, regulations, laws that have been forming. But my biggest issue is with my journey with the cigar industry. I've been making a lot of friends between social media and going to brick and mortars and meeting people at lounges. Do you think the future of the cigar industry is going more towards the online aspect of it, or do you think it's going to stick with tried and true brick and mortars?
As with so many things, the answer is it depends. And a part of it depends on where you live, right? If you look at the United States, there's a whole bunch of places in the country where you're going to drive for hours to get to a lounge. So if you want to interact with somebody, it's much more likely to be virtual. And then state by state, there are so many different regulations. Massachusetts, for example, there are very few places where you could go smoke a cigar in a lounge. It's really only places that were grandfathered before the laws changed. So in the Boston area, I think there are 2 maybe that are left. Now, if you talk about New Hampshire right next door, plenty of places to go to a lounge and smoke a cigar. And I guess you do both, right? And
Yeah.
But they're different, aren't they?
They are, and don't get me wrong. I met a lot of great people through Zoom chats and whatnot. That's where I started realizing, oh no, I have a few friends in Colorado and Washington where it's everything's so spread out. It's harder to just go to a regular brick and mortar.
Yeah.
Closest one might be an hour or 2 away.
Yep.
So that's
but,
what I was wondering. Where do you
well,
see the future being?
I think it's going to be split between both of them for the foreseeable future. And there are people that you'll meet in a lounge that you're never going to find online. There's still a lot of people that just are not part of the online world. And some of the most fascinating people I've met in lounges are, people who are older, or somebody from a different generation. You can have really interesting, in-depth conversations, but you're not going to find them online. So I think the virtual, what I found interesting about that way back when Steve Saka had Cigar Nexus, he did something called the Cigar Boondoggle in Las Vegas. And this was all people who had never met in real life, then got together for a weekend in Las Vegas and smoked cigars. And that was a whole lot of fun. I think, I don't know if you've had a chance to connect with somebody you first met in the virtual space and then go smoke a cigar with them in real life. And then, okay, it's a little bit different. And you really, I think you get to know the person better when you're sitting with them.
It's actually funny that you say that. I'm part of this Zoom cigar bar, and we went to the Rocky Mountain Cigar Festival this past couple weeks ago, and about 30 of us met up, and it was just an amazing experience.
Yep.
Meeting everyone in person. So, that's also kind of why my question stemmed from that is, like I said, I met a lot of people online, but meeting them in person was a completely different experience. And I personally enjoy it. I'm in Houston, so I go everywhere to Austin, San Antonio, Dallas to go to different lounges, meet up with people.
Yeah, it's always fun too. If you are a person who travels, you'll think, wait a minute, I actually know somebody in that city. I haven't met him yet, but I know him. And you can always find friends out there.
I'm going to go see Jay Davis this weekend for my birthday. So
excellent. Hope you have a great time. My birthday's on Tuesday next week.
Oh, we're right next to each other then.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Good to meet you.
Likewise.
Mace, please chime in. And by the way, Ed just over and over again re-emphasized the point that we need to spread our wings a little bit and make sure that we get our Light 'em Up podcast rolling as soon as possible.
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more, Reinhard. It's another great session. Ed, great to actually see you, so to speak. See you in
they don't let me on camera. It's and listen,
I think you're too happy being behind the camera. So
yeah. I actually am. That's where I'm most comfortable.
No, it's great. It's great seeing you, and it's another great session. And I guess I got a couple of questions, and one is more statement / question, and it comes back to that topic that yourself and Jose talked about, and even Reinhard mentioned in terms of you guys have a platform, you have an audience, and you have listeners across the spectrum in terms of new, everyday, and seasoned smokers, right? And I've got a question around, my opinion is that when there's misinformation in the industry, and this is if we look at any industry, when there's misinformation, I always, I can be a bit combative, and I see it as we've got to confront the issue and we've got to call it out. So it's almost a question of what is it a case of the industry is, the community is so small that we don't want to call people out on, excuse my French, but on their BS, their bullshit? Or why is there such a lack in terms of when you hear somebody saying something and I listen to multiple podcasts. I am trying to absorb as much as I can about the industry, because as long as I've been smoking, I'm still like, I don't know enough, right? I haven't I haven't seen the whole fermentation process. I haven't been through that process, but I also sometimes listen to podcasts, and I genuinely will listen to somebody in the first 5 minutes say something, and I'll just be like, this is absolute crap, and I'll just switch off.
Yeah.
What's the logic behind, or the reluctance to call stuff out, like just publicly? When you guys are on a podcast, you might be sat there with Steve and various others. What's the reluctance to actually call out what you've heard and say, guys, for all of you thousands and thousands of listeners, this is not right. This is not how it's done or how you should, what's the reluctance there?
I think you'll see every now and then on Cigar Authority, we'll do an episode on things like how you should behave in a cigar lounge, right?
Yeah.
That
Yep.
that is calling people out without being confrontational directly to a particular person, right? Because you said confront, which I would turn into how do we educate? Because I don't think people are doing this intentionally. If they were doing it intentionally, then confront is the right word. If they're doing it through ignorance, let's educate. And we do try to go to some shows about myths in the cigar industry, and every now and then it's interesting because you end up with an audience of people at all different levels in their cigar journey. Some of the people may be listening to this show after having their first cigar, right? So at least once a year, we'll do an episode on, okay, here's the right way to cut and light a cigar, right? And how many pictures have you seen where somebody seemed to have cut the cigar in half and then proudly displays it? Look at my great cigar.
Yeah, I've seen that.
But you do see people being confrontational with those photos, and not in a constructive way. The guy obviously doesn't know the right way to cut a cigar. So it'd be better to explain to him, hey, next time you enjoy a cigar, here's what you might want to do. And still, I don't know if he doesn't want to do it. He paid for it. So
Nah, I appreciate that.
Let him do what he wants, right? So no, I agree with you, though. It can be somewhat maddening when people are spewing nonsense.
Yes.
And I think all you can do is take comfort in the fact that they probably don't have large audiences.
I agree, and I can appreciate that. For a lot of people, as we say, in the industry and from a social media perspective, it's not necessarily a source of revenue. So they're doing it out of what they know, and they're trying to educate. It's just, I guess, they might not have all the education behind it. So I can appreciate that, and that's a great answer. It's better to educate as opposed to confront and call them out on stuff, and then they lose viewership and stuff. So I appreciate that. That's a great answer. The second question that I had, and it's more of a personal one, and I'm sort of based out in Europe, out here in England. I just wanted to understand from your perspective in terms of your global travels and how you see the industry. We all, I think, in the industry, when we read up, we have this knowledge about what's going on in the US, the legalities and stuff. And we get
Right.
to that gets blown out of all proportion. We all know about it. What's your take on the European scene and sort of, I guess, where it's going from a legal perspective, your thoughts, your inputs, but then on a more personal level, your travels in Europe and sort of where you think, the scene's really hot right now, great lounges, great space to smoke, great communities. What's your take on that?
So I'm a little behind the times on the European scene. In the 80s and 90s, I spent a ton of time in Germany. My wife is from Scotland, so I got married in Edinburgh and had a nice Cuban cigar at my wedding. Yeah, but I'll be honest, in recent times when I've traveled to Europe, I bring my own cigars. I'm not going to lounges because the expense is absurd when you compare it to what I'm used to. And being a typical US person, we've got no idea what's going on in the rest of the world. Maybe you haven't noticed.
Oh God. Okay, I'm glad you called that out. I'm glad you
Yeah,
called that out.
that may not be 100% true, but it's not far from the truth. And so I'm not really qualified to talk about what's going on in the European scene. It is interesting to hear you speak, though, about we do have a global audience on the Cigar Authority, and Yeah, there's a whole big part of the world that doesn't necessarily care what's going on with the FDA. You know,
Yeah.
it does cascade a little bit. You know, we were talking before we actually got on to broadcast, and you know, if the FDA had shut down the ability to create new brands in the US, that certainly would have impacted you in Europe, and by that impacted you positively in that the manufacturers would start to create new brands targeted for Europe. And some already have done that in anticipation of problems with the FDA. Skip Martin at Roma Craft has cigars that he manufactures for Germany. So I think it's interesting. The whole scene may become more global because of what Cuba's doing. You know, I think Europe's going to develop a hunger for New World cigars. And the question will be, as we discussed prior to being on here, is can the manufacturers meet the demand with New World cigars? And well, let me ask you a question. What have you seen as far as New World cigars? Are things changing over there?
Yeah, I mean, you know what's interesting is, and we've got somebody directly in the industry here live on Ray, sort of looking after one of the shops in England here. But what's really interesting that I've noticed is that prior to the Cuban pricing fiasco that's happened, there's definitely been more of an appetite from consumers. Because I guess for me, having noticed the UK industry, it's definitely been more Cuban, right? Traditionally, it's been Cuban led. Lots of Cuban, you know, lots of Cubans being sold in the shops. But more recently, there's the shops themselves are stocking more of the New World cigars. But actually, beyond that, what's actually really helping the industry grow out here is that there are more of the manufacturers and producers coming out here. So in the US, it's commonplace, right? You've
Yeah.
got Perdomo, you've got everybody sort of going to different lounges and sort of talking about their cigars and really getting the appetite and getting people to buy in. And what I've seen happening over the last couple of years, I say a couple of years, you know, sort of the last year and a half, is that actually more people flying in and doing sort of different events across the UK, across Europe, which I feel is great because it's actually getting people opening up to New World cigars. It's not all Cuban, because
Right.
in Europe, in Spain, in the UK, in lots of countries, it's so, you know, the Cuban Puro. So if anything right now, I would definitely say that the New World cigars, they've made their imprint. And once people find out that actually Cuban cigars, the pricing has gone up drastically,
Yeah.
it's going to drive more people towards that market. So yeah, I definitely see it as a positive. I think that the New World's going.
Yeah.
But that ties me into another final question.
Sure.
And it's more of a general one. You've kind of been in the industry for a while. You've seen it go from the old days where it was, you know, online forums and chat groups, very sort of siloed locations, branch out into the cigar aficionados of the world and the publications, and then go on to YouTube. YouTube has now had their switch. I guess in a way, where do you kind of see where do you see that next avenue? Do you think where do you think it's gonna go? Because you've got podcasts that are making a huge sort of, they're really, you know, laying down the market. Where do you think it's gonna go from here?
Yeah, podcasts are the safest haven for cigars, in that it's unlikely anyone's going to pull the plug on that. So the question becomes, it's a different medium, right? There's no video to go with it. Does that matter? For a lot of the content, no, it doesn't. You know, it's talking head type of content. You know, we can see each other. Maybe you're curious, what does this guy really look like? Well, you can do a search and probably find that out. So
Yeah.
I think it may move to that, and that may not be ideal for some of the people who consume content, but at least we'll still be able to get the information out. You know, and as I said earlier, the problem with the video content, if you take YouTube out of the picture, is the discoverability of the content. How do you find this stuff? And most of the people who do video shows now related to cigar products also put the video on Odyssey and or Rumble, and then Rumble, a lot of people won't go near it just based on the other content that's on it. That can be a little bit of the problem, right? If
Yeah.
they'll accept a cigar smoker, it seems like they'll accept anybody, you know.
True.
So I think it is going to be challenging. I'm not sure where it's going to go. We obviously track it as carefully as we can because we've got our podcast or our video content that could disappear at any moment. We haven't made the decision to self-host yet, but it may come to that at some point in the future.
Thank you so much, Ed. It's been great sort of listening to your input and your thoughts on it.
No, it's great to meet you.
It's been great. Thank you so much.
Excellent questions, Mace. Many thanks for chiming in as always. One question that I had a bit earlier, and Mace kind of triggered it. How do you balance, especially with the show that has been running for such a long time as the Cigar Authority, where you always want to keep your loyal followers engaged and you want to provide new and noteworthy content to them, but at the same time you always have new listeners coming in, and you also want to bring some of the, you said it, how to cut and light my cigar
Right.
content without annoying your old time followers, but at the same time still being open to new people joining the flock.
Yeah, and part of that is it's a somewhat delicate balance, but all of our listeners, any of the loyal listeners, often they'll decide this particular episode isn't for me, so they don't watch that one. But we're not changing what the show is, so they'll tune in the following week. And now we've got an interview with Lisette or somebody. So I think you still have to go back and do that content. And, it may not be as popular as some of your other episodes, but, we're not doing this as a popularity contest. I think Dave Garofalo often says, yeah, it doesn't matter how many likes you get, you can't take that to the bank. So for us and for somebody who's doing content, if somebody's thinking about I'd like to do a podcast and I'd like to encourage more cigar podcasting, you really have to first figure out your why. Why am I doing this? And if the answer is I want millions of listeners, well, give up now. There aren't millions of listeners. Whatever the number is, I think Dave often says 1 in 1,000 people smoke cigars. All right, you already limited the audience pretty drastically there. A lot of the demographics of cigar smokers skew older, many of whom just don't participate online. So you really got a fairly limited audience relative to all the people out there. So you have to understand what you're doing it for. And it really should be for the passion that you feel for the product. And over time, believe me, 13 years ago, Cigar Authority did not have many people. I think we knew every listener by name at that point. Rudy from Canada being the first listener. But part of it is having enough passion to sustain you to do it for long enough to build an audience. And that really takes quite a bit of time. But as I say, I encourage people to go ahead and pursue the passion. And if they want to get into this as far as podcasting or anything, they can reach out to me. I'll help anybody who needs the help in order to, get them over whatever technical hurdles, because I just believe the more we can get out there and reach different people, the healthier the whole industry will be.
Amen. Ed, before we wrap things up, I would love to hear some of your perspectives when looking ahead. So please share with us a little bit of your perspective for the future for the industry, and not particularly in regards to the regulatory issues, because we could probably host a whole show about that, and also besides the media aspect, but purely when it comes to the cigar culture. What's your perspective on the months and years ahead, and where would you like this to be headed? What can we do better as an industry, as cigar enthusiasts, in order to help not only sustain but grow this wonderful world?
And I think that's the challenge, right? It starts with younger folks. A lot of the industry is, gray hair like me. And we really need to attract some younger people into this culture of cigar smoking. I think, and it's held pretty true for quite a period of time. The exception are people under 30 years of age that smoke cigars. There really are not that many of them. So I think part of it is, if you approach that from a media side of things, create some content that's interesting to a demographic that we're not serving right now. And, I think that's going to be important for the longer term. The old people someday, hopefully not soon, are not going to be purchasing the product anymore. Now, what's encouraging, though, is if you look at the numbers, cigars are doing well. They really are, in terms of the number of imports into the US. As we talked about, I think the demand for non-Cuban product is just going to get stronger and stronger in Europe and around the world as they become underserved by Cuban products. They're going to want more. So I think part of it is not so much that the demand is going away. How are we going to meet the demand? Which is a good problem to have. It really is. It's a lot worse if you have a lot of product and nobody wants it. But right now, I think the demand, especially worldwide, is very strong. So a lot of it for me is making sure over time that we're getting new cigar smokers who are passionate about this and will continue to carry it forward.
And do you think that the most recent evolutions that we've seen there in the numbers, are they sustainable? I fondly remember, in particular during the early spikes of the boom that occurred during COVID. You discussed it on the show quite often as to where does it actually come from? Is it the old dude, with all due respect, with the gray hair, as you said, who's now smoking 3 cigars instead of 1 per day? But it seems like we're now seeing more and more new people coming into the ecosystem.
It's interesting, yeah, because I don't think that accounts for all of the demand. People are starting to go back into offices now. Things are starting to normalize, although I think there are still more people that are working in a hybrid model. So now maybe they're down to, 2 days in the office. But the numbers have moved a little bit if you look at the latest quarter of imports, but not drastic. Not really enough to account for, everybody went back to where they were. So I think we probably did pick up some new people, which is good.
And that's certainly a most positive outlook and the high note that I would like to finish today's session on. Ed, what a tremendous pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing this
I had a lot of
2
fun
hours with us.
A great show. I like being able to talk to people, have them participate in the show. I think you've got a good format here.
Thank you so much, Ed. It was an absolute pleasure and privilege. I very much look forward to seeing you in the US in due time, hopefully at the studio for one of
hopefully
the
next
Cigar
year.
Authority shows.
Next year, I'd like to get to Germany for the Cigar Journal Awards. That'd be a lot of fun.
It'll be a pleasure to see you there, and I'm sure we'll see each other before. at the PCA and hopefully in New England at the studio
Well, come
for one
visit
of the,
us.
with great pleasure.
Listen, I know people. I could get you on the show.
I have a slight feeling it will be a pleasure, and I look forward to that day. Ed, many thanks again for today. It was absolutely fabulous to have you with us. Next week we will be back with a little Into Tobacco pre-show because we're going live on Wednesday, the day before Into Tobacco. We will have Matt Ty and Garrett Robinson from How About That Cigar joining us next week, and we'll share a bit of the international perspective, the US perspective, and look at the Into Tobacco and what's about to happen. So please join us again next week. And many thanks for today. It was an absolute pleasure to have you all.
Thank
Ed,
you.
many thanks for everything. A very
Great
good night
session.
and a great rest of your day to you all. Goodbye.
Great session.
Light 'em up.
Thank you, Reinhard. Thank you, Ed.